Imagine starting with absolutely nothing. I mean, no money, no support, not even a clear idea of what tomorrow looks like. Then, a simple piece of paper shows up with a 90-day deadline. We're about to get into how that one little moment kicked off a complete transformation of a man's life.
So there it was, just stuck to a shop window. A mysterious little note with just 6 words. 90 days, that is all you need. Now, for someone who felt like their time had completely run out, this was more than a note. It was like a lifeline, the tiny spark that would set off this incredible journey.
And that man's name was Daniel. At 29 years old, he was living in a single room, totally cut off from the world. He had no job, 0 savings, and was completely disconnected from his family. In his own head, his story was already finished. It was over.
And that really brings us to the heart of this whole explainer, doesn't it? Can one single decision, a single thought sparked by some random note, actually change everything?
All right, let's dive into part 1, the 90-day catalyst. This is where it all kicks off, right at rock bottom. Just think for a second about how bleak this really was. I mean, 29 years old, jobless, no savings, no one to call for help. He was trapped, and worse, he was convinced that this was it for him. This was going to be his life, forever. That's true hopelessness right there. But that note, it did something. For the first time in what felt like forever, he made a real decision. He went back to that little room, wrote the number 90 on a scrap of paper, and just stuck it to his wall. This wasn't just a number anymore. It was a deadline. It was the starting bell for the fight of his life. Okay, so part 2 shows us how this change actually started to happen, one step at a time. And spoiler alert, it wasn't some huge, dramatic leap. It started incredibly small.
I mean, just look at this timeline. Day 1 wasn't go find a job. It was just get up and walk outside. For a whole week, that's all he did, just observing. Then, on day 8, he stops to read a notice board. By day 10, he's volunteering. And it wasn't until day 17 that he earned his very first dollar. See, these tiny, consistent little steps were building a foundation that he probably couldn't even see yet.
You know, that volunteer notice he saw? It had just 3 words on it that cut through all the negative chatter in his head. Just show up. It was so simple, so direct. No experience needed, no special skills. Just be here. And for a guy who felt totally invisible, well, that was an invitation he could actually accept. Which brings us right to part 3, building real momentum. This is the part of the story where all those small steps start to add up and pay off in much bigger ways. Now, he didn't do this all alone. Key people started to show up and shape his path. There was Marcus, who gave him that quiet mentorship and that first, crucial nod of approval. Then Sarah, who gave him actual proof of his own value by paying him for his work. And then there was Ruth, a tough business owner who taught him about high standards and what it means to be resilient. Each one of them gave him a lesson he desperately needed. By day 24, the change that was happening on the inside was starting to show on the outside. He went from being invisible with his head down to being noticed. He started making eye contact, actually speaking to people. That feeling of hopelessness was being replaced by a sense of purpose.
Okay, now for part 4, the moment of truth. Because just when things were finally looking up, a crisis hit that threatened to tear down everything he had just built. So it's day 60 and disaster strikes. A huge company moves into the neighborhood, basically selling the same stuff as Rude's small business, but for way, way cheaper. And just like that, Rude's entire business and Daniel's brand new life was about to collapse.
And of course, this is when that old voice in his head came roaring back. You are not ready. You will fail. You always fail. All those old doubts, all those fears, they just came flooding back right when Ruth needed him the most. He almost listened to it. Almost.
So when Ruth turned to him for help, when his mind was screaming, "No, you can't do this," his response was simple, just one word, yes. And that single word, that choice to defy his fear, it changed everything. Again.
His plan? Well, it was terrifying, but it was also brilliant. They couldn't compete on price. No way. So they would compete on truth. He decided he would take Ruth's real story of building something special from nothing and tell it to the whole neighborhood, door to door. He knew he'd face rejection, but the goal wasn't to win everyone over. The goal was to get that first yes and turn it into a movement.
So what happened? Did it work? Let's get to part 5, a life transformed.
Now, the reality of his plan was pretty brutal. I mean, the vast majority of doors were just slammed in his face. A much smaller group of people actually listened. But that tiny sliver, that crucial few who said yes, they were all he needed. That first handful of supporters was enough to start a ripple effect. And then came day 90, the final day, the finish line of his challenge. And the reward came. Ruth offered him a partnership. She said to him, "You are not just working for me anymore, you are building this with me." In just 3 months, he had gone from a lost volunteer to an equal partner.
And that brings us to our final part, part 6. Let's bring this all back to you. Your 90-day decision.
So what's the big takeaway from Daniel's story? When you boil it all down, it comes down to this: the decision to keep going. That's so often the one thing that separates success from failure. It's not about being the most talented person. It's not about getting lucky. It's just about making the choice to try one more time.
And this is the core of it all, really. Daniel started with nothing, and he didn't wait around for the world to give him a chance. He decided to take one for himself. His transformation wasn't because of some special gift. It was about pure agency. It's about what can happen when you simply decide to act.
Which leaves us with this one last thought. Daniel's 90 days completely changed his world. Well, your 90 days start right now. So the only question left to ask is, what's your first step?